Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Coffee with the Collection program. I'm Taylor McKeown, the Curator of Collections. Thank you so much for joining us in this fun way of enjoying art with your coffee. I have my cup here, and I'm glad that these programs, these virtual programs, can gather museum friends near and far. I'll do a brief talk, about 30 minutes, and feel free to enter any questions or comments in the chat. I'd be happy to answer those at the end. Today, we're going to talk about recent acquisitions to the permanent collection. So these are all going to be objects that we acquired within the last year. So they haven't been shared yet via exhibition or online programming. But I want to start by explaining how we acquire works for the collection. We often get questions about that, and it involves many layers. It starts with the proposed acquisition, and as a museum staff, we review any proposed acquisitions for relevance to the collection. We work with a collections committee from our board of advisors and artists. They review all of those and make a final recommendation to our board of advisors. And acquisitions have primarily come to us as generous donations from collectors and artists, though we do purchase works as well. But we take many factors into consideration when acquiring objects for the permanent collection, the quality of the work, its ability to support and promote our mission, its condition, and its relevance to other works in the collection. And really each work informs the other. We always discuss the use of an artwork as a tool for education and for inspiration, and how a new acquisition might relate to other pieces in the collection. And really, in essence, the museum collects in order to inspire creativity, connect people, and enrich lives through art. So as I said, today I want to introduce you to some new pieces to the collection. People like Sandy will have seen these already at the board meeting, but I'm excited to share those with you and our online audience. And I'll share the new acquisitions and some pieces that were already in the collection so you can see how they relate to one another. So let me share my screen here. Y'all can see that? Got a thumbs up? Okay. So today we're going to maybe. Technology is great when it cooperates. There we go. Today we're going to start with an untitled portrait by Ada Caldwell. Caldwell was professor of art at South Dakota State University in Brookings from 1899 to 1936. The rooms of what was her art department, now at Morrill Hall, look out on R. Anderson Plaza on the back side of the museum. And I'm sure she'd be so pleased that the State Art Museum is on the South Dakota State University campus. Through her lifetime of study with various artists around the country at art colonies and colleges, she brought back this incredible knowledge to her students in Brookings in the early 20th century, and encouraged some of her very young students to continue their art education, which propelled them onto significant careers in the arts, including Harvey Dunn and the sculptor Gilbert Griswold. This particular piece was donated to us by the Brookings Public Library. It had been in their collection since the 1960s, and I learned about it through a document in our archives. It dates to the 1890s when Caldwell was a student at the Chicago Art Institute. She was studying under John Vanderpoel, who would go on to write an important book on drawing the human figure, which is still in print today. So it has interesting connections to that teacher and that lineage of study. And we were really interested in this work because it's such an early work, and these are 3 pieces by Caldwell that were already in the collection. We have, I think we have about 35 pieces by Caldwell in the collection, and she was primarily a landscape artist. So these are typical scenes that she did of Minnesota, Colorado, and what is now Black Elk Peak in the Black Hills. So we were thrilled that this portrait filled a gap in our collection, our representation of Caldwell, that early work. And I also think it's a significant acquisition in that the portrait shows what Caldwell would have been teaching in the right at the turn of the century when Harvey Dunn studied under her. And I thought I'd share these 2 works, which are by Harvey Dunn. The one on the left was done at SDSU when he was a student of Caldwell's. And the one on the right is Dunn's portrait of Caldwell done just after her passing. So I think, again, it's so interesting, all the connections that these objects have to one another and how that could be used for an exhibition. So we take that all into account when we're acquiring new works. And our next recent acquisition will show you yet again how we consider how works in the collection engage with one another. This is by another SDSU professor, Mel Spinar, who taught at SDSU from 1969 to 2001. He's professor emeritus of painting and is still active in painting in Sioux Falls. And this is a portrait he did of Ron Valesky, who is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and was a South Dakota legislator for 16 years. And we were really excited about this acquisition because it has so many interesting connections to the museum. Valesky was close to Donna Brown, who was a board member at the museum for many years and was instrumental in acquiring a lot of Harvey Dunn paintings for the permanent collection. And she also funded Valesky's law career. So it was an interesting connection that Valesky had with Donna Brown, who was so near and dear to the museum. And we're thrilled to have this beautiful portrait. The brushwork on this is just beautiful. And again, it connects back to even Caldwell's portrait, showing that lineage of portraiture in South Dakota. So great connections there too. And next, we're going to pivot. I want to talk about a grouping of artworks donated by Tom Thorson, who is an artist in the Black Hills and a graduate of the art department at SDSU. Tom and I had been corresponding about something completely unrelated, but our staff had been talking about an exhibit that he was a part of in New York City in 1982 at the Mercer Gallery. And it was an exhibit titled South Dakota Experimental Artists, and included the work of Don Boyd, who was a leader in the Fluxus art movement and professor at SDSU, and 4 of his students from SDSU were included in the exhibition, including Carol Hepper, Duane Schat, Dana Crooks, and Tom Thorson. So I'd been talking to Tom about how we were really interested in these 5 artists having a pretty major show at a New York gallery in the early 80s, and that we would love to represent that show somehow in the permanent collection, whether it be by works that were in that show or made by them during that time. And it just so happened that Tom had this great grouping that he had saved from the Mercer Gallery show. And the little assemblage on the left is a piece that was exhibited there. It's only about 5 inches by 7. And you can see the media listed there. It's cotton fiber, Badlands gumbo, which is essentially a soil Rit dye, cottonwood twig, jute twine, mica, watercolor, sequins, and pebbles. And so a lot of Don Boyd's students were experimenting with different materials like this. And so this shows what Tom was working on in the early 80s, what he exhibited at the Mercer Gallery in New York. And then while we were talking about acquiring this group of objects, I talked with Tom that we would love to represent the range of his practice. So while he was working really abstract and experimental in the early 80s, he's moved into landscape painting and has done that really since the 90s in this Fauvist way with the really expressive brushwork and great colors. So this is great that these two pieces together represent the range of Tom's practice. And it was fun during the collections committee review. Diana Beal, printmaking professor at SDSU, had made the connection that even these two works talk to one another, and that cottonwood twig at the center of the assemblage kind of resembles the landscape, the orange tree in his later work. So great connections there too. And Tom also had works by Don Boyd and Duane Schat, two of the other artists that were represented in that Mercer Gallery show. So the piece on the left is by Don Boyd, who was their instructor. He was in the art department at SDSU in the late 70s, early 80s. And he was a leader of the Fluxus art movement, which really focused on experimental art and sort of rebelled against the commercial art world and performance art. And so this piece is one of many that made up a larger assemblage. Don took pieces of Chevrolet windshield and bound them with leather and string, and put it into a large assemblage. And as I understand it, he let people take pieces from the assemblage at the gallery. And this is the piece that Tom took from the assemblage. So it's a great representation again of that show. And Duane Schat was also represented in the show. He was at SDSU, graduated in 1983. And again, another really experimental artist from that time in South Dakota. And I think this is a really interesting series he did. It's a pressed paper box and pages made out of dried agricultural materials, pasture grass, corn silage. And I think it relates to, it could even relate to a Harvey Dunn painting, Dunn's agricultural scenes in a very different way. So we're excited to have these. And another pivot, this is a great traditional landscape by the artist Charles Greener. And this came to us as a gift of the John Kronholm family. Greener was born in Wisconsin in 1870 and settled in the Faulkton, South Dakota area in the early 1890s, where he opened a painting and photography studio, which he operated until his death in 1935. And you can see a photograph on the left or on the right of his studio. And the Kronholms had approached us about donating this work, and we have 53 Greener paintings in the permanent collection. So a really great representation of his work. But the majority of what we have are the really small works that you see in the photograph on the right. And this is a large commissioned work that's a perfect representation of Greener's style and his first love, which was the South Dakota landscape. These are the hills around Faulkton. And I think it's a perfect representation of him for the collection. We're thrilled to have it. And as I said, the majority of the works that we acquire are through the generosity of donors, through collectors, artists, but we do acquire some works through purchase. One way we do that, I should mention first that the Carol Cook Geu is on the call with us today. I'm so glad that she could join us. She's the artist of this great felted work that's currently on exhibition, the Governor's 9th Biennial, which is on exhibit at the Dahl Arts Center through April 2nd, I believe. The biennial is in its 9th iteration and is funded by the South Dakota Arts Council through the statewide services grant. And as part of that grant funding, they award the 4 host institutions a purchase award. So that includes us, the Washington Pavilion in Sioux Falls, the University Art Galleries in Vermilion, and the Dahl. We all receive purchase awards so that we can acquire great work by contemporary South Dakota artists living and working here for our permanent collections. And that has created a great source for us to pull from for exhibitions. This last exhibition, it was really difficult to make selections because it was such a strong show. And we settled on 3 works that we thought filled holes in the collection. We really wanted to focus on a diversity of materials. So we selected 2 works that will join the South Dakota textile collection in our permanent collection, and a piece of sculpture. So this first one is by Carol Geu, who is Senior Lecturer of Art History at the University of South Dakota. And this piece is so beautiful. I think, Carol, you primarily work in felt and oil pastel. And, you know, this on screen, I think, could be an oil pastel, but it's great on screen, but even better in person. So if anybody's West River or knows somebody West River, tell them to get out and see this in person, because the felt is just beautiful on this piece. And we're so happy to have it in the collection. I think we have just a couple other felted pieces by Greta Bodegard. So we're happy that they'll talk with one another in the collection now. And do you want to share anything about this, Carol? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
No, I'm happy to share. First of all, I would like to say how honored I am to become part of the permanent collection at the South Dakota Art Museum and to join the great legacy that you all have built around artists from South Dakota. I've always been drawn to the land and the sunset. It's a place where I find solace and peace. And I think some people think about sunrise as the start of the day, but in many parts of my life, sunset has been the start of the day, where I'm able to concentrate on myself and things that I work on. And as anybody that lives in South Dakota knows, every day comes to a different conclusion based on the sunset and what we see, from some days it being very peaceful and calm and simple to days when it just really takes your breath away. So those are the things I'm interested in capturing. I was fascinated with wool felting and seeing how I could manipulate those materials, similar to the way with oil pastels, that painterly expression with the materials. And I really like exploring non-traditional materials and materials that may be more associated with women and craft, and seeing how those can be used and brought into the conversation with more traditional fine arts materials.
Sure. I really encourage everybody to look back at the cocktail chats from the Governor's Biennial, because I remember you sharing an image of a Miss Magazine cover, wasn't it, that you embroidered, and was so interesting. So I encourage people to go to our YouTube channel and check out that cocktail chat, because that was great. I also wonder if you could tell us about the process of working with felt. I know you started with the felt base, didn't you?
Right. I start with a base of felt that's probably 1/8 of an inch thick. So it's a little bit thicker than maybe what you would consider to be a traditional felt sheet. And then that sits on a foam block that's fairly soft. And then I use a 3-needle tool that is sharp needles that are about 3 inches long. They can be various sizes. Some needle felters work with a single needle. And then the wool itself is called wool roving, and it's just the fibers. If you think about weavers who have that raw wool that they're working with, and then they weave it into yarn, but I take that raw wool, the fibers, and pull out anywhere from maybe a quarter sized group of fibers to single fibers. And then you basically just pound the needles into that foam block, and it combines the roving with the felt base. And if you don't like it, you can pull it out. You can combine colors, into when you're felting, as well as felting colors on top of each other. So when you see areas that look more wispy, those are where there's single or 2 or 3 strands that are felted into the body of the base.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that. I just love this piece. It depicts one of those nights that South Dakota Evening put on a good show, right? And you captured that beautifully. I'm so glad you could join us.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks. Wonderful. And we just have 2 pieces left, including the other 2 works that we acquired from the biennial. Now I wish that we had the other 2 artists on the call so we could pull them into the conversation. This is the other work that we settled on acquiring by Joanne Hoffman, who is an artist in Hill City and has been in quite a few of the biennials now. And we thought that, first of all, it was a great acquisition because we don't have any quilted works in the collection, and so it filled a need, really. But also there's something sort of mysterious about the composition and mystical, and we kept coming back to it. So again, thrilled to have that join the collection. And finally, Chris Meyer's Mass Consciousness, which is a cast iron sculpture. It's a self-portrait of the artist. And again, he talked about his process in the cocktail chat that we did last year of doing a silicone mold, which I think took 45 minutes to harden, and was quite uncomfortable, I think. But he liked that the result was a little rougher, those rough edges, and that all of the texture on his skin and the mask, he decided to leave because it gave a sense of wear and a history of the mask wear, and the burden that it is to wear a mask. And this was in the height of the pandemic in 2020. So we thought that this was a great representative object of Chris's practice, but also of that period in our history. And certainly we have lots of works in the collection that speak to international events, to political history. So another great way that works can engage with one another. So really, through these objects I've shared today, you can see the diversity of what we collect and what we exhibit at the South Dakota Art Museum. We've had a portrait by Ada Caldwell from the 1890s, a portrait of a significant South Dakotan by Mel Spinar, the grouping of experimental works from Tom Thorson that represent South Dakotans questioning and broadening the perspective of what is art. And then these 3 wonderful works by contemporary South Dakota artists that show that the visual arts are alive and really exciting here in our state. So some of these works I think will be included in a permanent collection show we're doing this summer that's pulling from the permanent collection. So I hope you'll come out and see that show and all the other great things we have to share. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and I'd be happy to answer anything, or chat. You know, I need to finish my coffee still too.
When did you receive the painting by Ada Caldwell?
That was so these were all acquired last summer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
I
that
can't
one,
believe the Brookings Library wanted to part with that.
well, you
But
know,
I'm
they were
glad the
so,
museum has it.
yeah, they were so generous in doing that. I met with their director and their board and told them that we'd love it for the collection and that it would fill a need, and that it would be well preserved here, and they agreed. And it was kind of funny because it had been in an office where they all agreed that it would be better, more accessible here, and they were thrilled to let us have it. So.
Has I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but thinking back, have you ever had an exhibit that and that just focused in on people who were affiliated with SDSU at some point and their artwork?
I don't think so, Lynette, but we certainly could. You know, I think almost all the visual arts professors since Ada Caldwell's time are probably represented in the collection by at least one work. So that could be a really interesting show, I think. And really art faculty in general throughout the state, you know, we collect throughout the state. So South Dakota, you know, SDSU is close to home, so we probably have a wider representation of that, but lots of professors at USD are represented and participate. So yeah, that'd be an interesting show.
We'd like to thank you all so much for being here for our very first Coffee with the Collections. And we hope you enjoyed your time with us and that you'll want to join us again. Taylor, I don't know if you saw that Rachel had left a comment in the chat that she didn't have a question, but she was really glad to see the first quilted piece to be added to the collection. So that's a fun first for us all. And I'd like to just invite you all to come to our next Coffee with the Collections, which is slated for April 22nd. So we hope that we'll see you then with your cup of coffee and from the comfort of your home or office as we explore more about the work in our collections. I don't want to cut anyone off. Were there any final questions or comments before we go?
There was. We had a comment from the Facebook live stream that came from Maria Tesh, who is a Brookings transplant to Maine. And so she's been watching through Facebook. And she just wanted to thank you for remembering Donna Brown, because she knew that Donna had put in so many hours back when the museum opened.
We are so grateful for Donna. Yep. And she donated quite a few Harvey Dunns herself to the collection. So she was so important to our history in many ways.
While we're here, we'd also like to give a shout out to all of our members and donors. Thank you so much for your support. It's because of your support that we are able to offer great programs like this and exciting exhibitions and acquire new things for the collection. So thank you for continuing to support the museum in a variety of ways. And we'd love to see you bring back friends for our next Coffee with the Collections.
Thanks, everyone.
And if you want a rerun of this, it'll be live on our Facebook page very shortly, but we'll also do a little fancier version that'll go to our YouTube channel, where if you're up in the middle of the night, there's a good 24 hours plus of YouTube binge watch opportunities from our programs over the last year and a half or so. And I know I have learned something from each and every one of them.
Me too. Yeah.
Carol, we're so glad you were able to join us
Yeah.
today. We're very honored to have your pieces in addition to the collection.
Well, thank you very much. This was really wonderful. You all do such fantastic programming. I'm just thrilled to be part of it.
Great.
Thank you, Carol. I'm anxious for it to come home now.
Well, I think Rapid City keeps extending how long they want to keep the exhibit. So
I
you may have to
know.
go out and fight them for it.
Exactly.
You can't blame them. It's an excellent exhibit.
It is.
So if you haven't
Thank
seen
you,
it,
Taylor.
Thanks, Lynette.
get on out there. Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.